Haven't yet, but I've got my eye on a particular one. I think it's going to be the one I go for. I want to do just a little bit more research.
Hmm.
Um, the specs are good. The machine itself looks good, but I only have found a couple articles on people running Linux, and that is a little surprising to me. So I'm going to see if maybe I'm just not looking in the right places, or
Or maybe
I
it's
don't
so
know.
ubiquitous now that, people don't feel the need to post about it.
It's possible. I mean, it's a late 2016, December 2016 is when it came out. So have to think in the last 6 years that enough people have had Linux on it. The article I found was at least a Debian article, so it was Debian 10 and 11, and the article I found was at least a Debian 11 sound like it worked really well. Just the cameras didn't work, which apparently isn't all that uncommon. So it's not a deal breaker, but I would like to at least have a front-facing camera so I could do meetings. But if not, you know, for the price point, it's less than $100. It's like around 90 to $100 for that model. So, and me being a cheapskate.
E- E- Eric, I need
Aren't
you
we
to
all?
do something for me today. Bring up the YouTube, put it on mute, check the live stream, and keep an eye on the chat, on the live stream chat.
Okay.
And we are live now.
Excellent.
Okay. I need to post a telegram. Oh, and Danny wants to do a pre-recorded
Yes, I saw that.
segment, and we need somebody
Yeah, I saw
that can make time and do the interview with Danny.
Okay.
When is she available?
She did post the times. You'd have to go back through the chat and see.
Okay.
It sounds like she's free through tomorrow, but it's like early tomorrow for us, so it might be a good time for you.
Let me have a look in the
Yeah. What'd
charts.
she say? She said before 4:30. And I don't know where she lives though.
California, I thought. I might be crazy though.
Okay.
Uh,
Um,
is she in the? Was it in the
it
public
says
No, no,
I'd
no.
love to set up
General.
I'd love to set up an interview.
general?
I'm available today and tomorrow. Today, tomorrow, and Monday. So she meant Sunday, Monday. No, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Right.
So obviously that didn't happen today or yesterday or today. So either tomorrow or she said she won't be available again until next Sunday.
Either way is fine, really.
So
I mean, next Sunday's not going to kill us.
No.
next
I
Sunday will probably be better because that would give us a chance. We should come up with
some
some decent
questions.
questions. Yeah.
Well, some of the questions will probably be based on what she says about the new release. So I don't know.
Right.
Okay. Now I'm going to keep an eye on the OBS, but I have to switch to the show notes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that worked out fine. Now, where am I? All right, the stream's up and running. Oh, I need Audacity. That helps, doesn't it?
Or tenacity, as Bill seems to have found.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to test it yet.
Yeah, me neither. I'm
And
just going to use Audacity.
I don't want to
I'm
test
gonna
it,
stick with Gnome Sound Recorder.
on the show day.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, what could possibly go wrong if you do that? Yeah.
Surprisingly, everything.
Yeah, it was sarcasm, Joe.
So was mine.
Was it? Okay, fine. Boom, boom. Double
With a
negative.
hint of reality.
Are
'cause
you
it
really
could be.
telling me that I'm better at dry sarcasm than you are?
No,
Okay, because it sounded like you were saying that.
no, I wasn't saying that at all. in any way, shape,
Yeah.
or form. I would never concede that point to an American.
But an American that has lived in foreign countries.
Yes, you are not the. You are an atypical American.
Right, the
I'm
stereotypical.
changing everything I have to atypical American right now. No. Okay. You said you wanted to run today. I should just be
I
able
can
to
do. I
hit
don't mind.
record.
Whichever way you want to do it.
All right. I will do the 3 2s and yeah. You can host today,
Okay.
and I'll do the 3 2s and 1s, and Eric can monitor the chat.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right. All right, so let's start off with our 3, 2, 1 record. So is everybody ready? Audacity up and running?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, record. That was a perfect time for it too, because my air conditioner's running. All right. Okay, so now we're gonna do our 3, 2, 1, 0. So 3, 2,
Three.
1, 0.
0.
0.
Okay.
It's funny if you watch that back on YouTube. 0, even though audibly through video, I'm saying it at the same time you are. Often the audio in YouTube, for whatever reason, doesn't sync up.
Well, that's actually because it's based on when I receive it.
Yeah.
So the latency from you to me and Majid to me. So whatever time I receive it is the time that it's going to.
It's all you, isn't it, Joe? It's
Well,
all you.
When I'm running the OBS, yes, it is all me.
Okay then. So, should we get this show on the road, melon farmers?
Over to you, Majid.
Welcome to mintCast, the podcast about the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 422. This is episode 422.5, recorded on Sunday, 1st of October 2023.
What was I saying again? Oh yeah, I'm Joe.
The magic number, I'm Majid.
And I forgot to do an intro. Eric.
So, today, first up in the news, LMDE Fay released. Mint 21.2 Edge ISO approved. Long-term support for the Linux kernel to be cut. In security and privacy, update LibreOffice now. Chinese hackers have unleashed a never-seen-before Linux backdoor. Then in our wanderings, I mix my compartments. Joe does some printing. And Eric also didn't write anything here.
I didn't, but I did do some things.
In our Unedited section, we will be continuing talking about the wonderful world of Android. And finally, the feedback and a couple of suggestions. Okay, time for the news. Take it away, Joe.
First up in the news, LMDE 6 Fay released. From the Linux Mint blog via Londoner, LMDE 6 was released on Wednesday, September 27th. For those who don't already know, LMDE is Linux Mint project, which stands for Linux Mint Debian Edition. Its goal is to ensure Linux Mint can continue to deliver the same user experience if Ubuntu was ever to disappear. It allows the Mint team to assess how much they depend on Ubuntu and how much work would be involved in such an event. LMDE is also one of their development targets, such as it guarantees the software they develop is compatible outside of Ubuntu. And there are release notes here and instructions on how to upgrade from LMDE 5 to LMDE 6 in the show notes with links. A brief history, this is written by Londoner. The possibility of a Debian edition of Linux Mint was first mentioned in a blog post by Clem on November 19, 2007. It was developed primarily by Clem and Ike Doherty. At the time, regular Linux Mint was on version 4 Dorina, based on Ubuntu 7.10 Gutsy Gibbon, which came with a GNOME desktop environment in a 32-bit form only. The first official release of LMDE was almost 3 years later on September 7th, 2010. It was then a rolling release distribution based on Debian testing, although it was later possible to move to the Debian stable repositories. LMDE1 was available at first as a 32-bit only and had no codename. A 64-bit version was released in December 2010. Later releases were made with XFCE, Mate, and Cinnamon DEs in both 32 and 64-bit forms. Ike briefly worked full-time on Linux Mint from February 2011, but had to leave due to other commitments. Later versions of LMDE came and were codenamed Betsy, Cindy, Debbie, and Elsie respectively. LMDE2 was released with both Cinnamon and Mate. Since LMDE3, only the Cinnamon desktop has been released in 64 and 32-bit versions.
Anybody use LMDE?
I have tested it, and yeah, there are some differences, but mostly once you get everything running the way you want to, you don't notice it.
What kind of differences do you note?
It's mostly, graphical in nature, the way things are set up.
Okay.
Even with it being Cinnamon, it still just looks a little bit different.
Okay. Do you have to?
Yeah, we're actually going to test version 6 on Distro Hoppers Digest.
I'd
this
trust
month.
them over me any day when it comes to analyzing a distro.
No, I've something I've thought about trying out. I'm not. So the whole point of LMD is what would happen to Linux Mint if Ubuntu disappeared. I think whilst it's really good as a thought experiment and very good as an internal project, I've always wondered what the point of it as a release was.
Now,
Because who would use it? If you are the type of person that wants to use Debian, then surely you'd just use Debian.
now I think yes, that's what they're still saying, but I think there's a bit of drift there in that if you look at the changes being made in Ubuntu and the things that Clem has said about the changes being made in Ubuntu, especially in regards to things like Snap, it's less about if Ubuntu goes away and more what if Ubuntu drifts too far in a direction that Clem doesn't like. Would it then be better just to switch to the Debian base and have us be a direct fork off, or have Mint be a direct fork off of that instead of a fork off of Ubuntu?
See, that makes sense because I would assume that they have to basically get Ubuntu and then rip loads of bits out of it, like for example Snap, for example, and put their own bits in when you could just build on the Debian base yourself. Is that too simplistic to think of?
That's actually the correct, simple way to think about it. I mean, if you're presenting it to someone else that knows little about operating systems, then that's a really good way to explain it.
So, okay. So, go on, Eric. Next news item is yours.
All right. Mint 21.2 Edge ISO approved. This is from Londoner. A new Edge ISO of Mint 21.2 Cinnamon was approved for stable release on Friday, September 29th, and it is appearing on local mirror sites. As of writing, a formal announcement has not been made. In addition to its regular ISO images, Linux Mint sometimes provides an Edge ISO image for its latest release. This image ships with newer components to be able to support the most modern hardware chipsets and devices. If you cannot boot or install Linux Mint because your hardware is too recent and is not properly detected, look for an Edge ISO image. So it basically has a much newer kernel and some hardware enablement, and that's basically the difference.
So
And,
it sounds like a point release, or like you get these Ubuntu 22.04.02, kind of point releases for the LTSs, as well as having their new version. It seems kind of analogous to that.
it's really because the kernel that they ship with is a 5 dot kernel for for the main release. And for most systems, that's fine. And there's some hardware enablement in there as well. But if you have a cutting edge system that requires the more current kernels, the 6 series kernels for things like AMD has their drivers in the kernel, um, stuff like that. If you're trying to use Linux Mint, you're going to have a problem because your hardware is not supported, and they're not. It's not always part of the release cycle to have a Edge ISO included, and they even say in their wiki like the Edge ISO image is not as stable as the other ISOs and may not support as many proprietary drivers. Only use it if you can't boot or install with other ISOs. So I would think maybe people with more cutting edge hardware might be using something that's a little more like a rolling release or something that's more up to date than something like Mint. But it's nice that they at least provide the option of an Edge ISO.
I think a lot of it's to do with timing because if you're basing entirely on LTSs, which is what the Mint team are doing, we're now getting into the stage just before the next LTS. So it's been 18 months. And so, a lot happens in 18 months. And
Right.
so I think this is a way of kind of, um, for if anybody at this stage wants to get onto Linux Mint, then the version they're going to have is going to be slightly out of date. And so I think that's what this is for. I suppose the other thing you could do is just wait till the next LTS.
The
If
other, yeah, I think the last one was 20 series. Like it's been that long since they've released an Edge ISO, so it's not a frequent thing.
Yeah, so I think it is in the last 6 months before the new LTS version comes out. I think somebody can
You
look
might be
into
right.
that
Yeah.
properly. Okay. Speaking of kernels, long-term support for the Linux kernel to be cut. Again from ZDNet and again from Londoner, the main man. At the Open Source Summit Europe, Jonathan Corbett, Linux kernel developer and executive editor of Linux Weekly News, caught everyone up with what's new in the Linux kernel and where it's going from here. One major change coming down the road, the long-term support (LTS) for Linux kernels is being reduced from 6 to 2 years. Well, that's quite a difference. Currently, there are 6 LTS kernels: 6.1, 5.15, 5.10, 5.4, 4.19, and 4.14. Under the process date, 4.14 would roll off in January 2024 and another kernel will be added. Going forward, though, when the 4.14 kernel and the next two drop off, they won't be replaced. Why? Simple, Corbett explained. There's really no point to maintaining it for that long because people are not using them. The author of the article agrees because while someone might still be using 4.14 in a production Linux system, there's not going to be a huge number of them. Another reason and far bigger problem than simply maintaining LTS, according to Corbett, is that Linux code maintainers are burning out. It's not that developers are a problem. The last few Linux releases have involved an average of more than 2,000 programmers, including 200 new developers coming on board, working on each release. However, the maintainers, the people who check the code to see if it fits and works properly, are another matter. Maintainers face numerous obstacles to doing their jobs. Obstacle 1: many maintainers aren't paid to maintain. They maintain the code in addition to their day jobs. On top of that, they're facing increasingly demands on their time because of understaffing and because of the use of fuzzers to find bugs. While fuzzers are helpful, they also uncover way too many minor bugs, each of which must be examined and then dismissed by maintainers. The result, to quote Josef Bajic, Linux kernel file system developer and maintainers are burning out because maintainers don't scale. Added Derek Wong, another senior Linux kernel maintainer, this cannot stand, we need help. So how can they get help? Well, for one thing, Corbett suggests maintainers talk to their employers by paying them for their maintainer work. I can't see that going down well. As Wong observed, most of my friends work for small companies, non-profits, and local governments. They report the same problems with overwork, pervasive fear and anger, and struggle to understand and adapt to new ideas that I observe here. They see the direct connection between their organization's lack of revenue and resources. They don't understand why the hell the same happens to me in my workplace. Proximity associates when we all work for companies that clear hundreds of billions of dollars. It's a good question. Companies must realize they need to give back to Linux if they want to continue to reap its benefits.
Yep.
No.
So it's a case of it's a lot of work and people are doing it in their free time. So,
Lots of work,
what do you expect?
minimal benefit. No, I understand this completely. I mean, you got to put your work where it's going to do the most good.
Yeah.
And a 6-year-old kernel, yeah, I'm not going to be using a 6-year-old kernel. So,
You'd
No, I
have to
think
have
that's
a
perfect.
very specific use case for doing that.
and if you have that specific use case, you're most likely a business of some kind. And if you're a business of some kind, you can pay somebody to maintain your kernel for you.
Yeah. Yep. That's
Yeah.
absolutely true.
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
is one
Fair
of
enough.
the unfortunate side effects of free and open source software is that so many companies, when you think about the software economy in from a global perspective, it is a very high percentage of software companies that are using open source, and unfortunately, it's a very low percentage of them that are actually giving anything back. And I think you know, I think that if your company generates a significant portion of its revenue using open source projects and software, that the responsible thing to do, I mean, just to keep yourself going, right? I mean, this isn't even meant to be like altruistic and like generosity. It's self-interest to support these projects and make sure that things work. I mean, every so often you'll see where a maintainer of a very important project is like, you know what? I'm sick of this. I'm tired of all these companies using my software and literally nobody helping me. Nobody's giving me any money or any type of help or resources, and they just kind of get sick of doing it. And
No.
then there's a scramble to, how do we maintain this? And
A really good example, I think, happened within the last like 2 years was Log4j and the major security concern that it caused and the scrambling everybody did to fix it. Everybody that complained about the developer but never donated to the developer really needed to just sit down and shut up. If you're not going to pay him, then you don't get to complain about something he put out there for free in his spare time.
yeah, and it's a very minimal amount. If one person's able to maintain it, I mean, first of all, there should be some overlap there. I mean, you want to make sure at least more than one person understands it. And second of all, that one person, they're probably not looking to make millions of dollars a year off of this thing. They would probably just want to cover their expenses and their time, at least some of it.
Yeah,
And that is not a big ask.
but when you have something small like Log4j that has such a wide reaching impact, I think those guys should get paid. I mean,
Oh, I think they should get paid, everybody who's using especially from a corporate standpoint,
exactly.
you know?
If these people are using his code to make money, and it's that important to them as it was, because I know I spent like 2 months, fixing things because of Log4j. But yeah, he should get paid. He should get, even if it's like 0.1% of all of the business or whatever,
Right.
or point zero, even if it's 0.01%, there should be some percentage considering all of the companies that use this to make money.
Yeah, if you just do a software audit of your company and you say, okay, here are the, I don't know, however many open source projects we're using in our development process, maybe, or in our business processes internally. Like maybe it's not even a product that we produce and sell, but it's something that makes our business easier to run. And if you just do an audit like that and you say, okay, what are the most important pieces of software in here and are they being properly maintained? And if you see that the answer is no, then I think again, it's self-preservation. It's not even about being like, oh, contributing to free and open source. Like it is a conversation about like, well, this is a contingency. Like we need to make sure this stuff keeps working. And if it doesn't, what do we do? It's cheaper for us to invest a little bit of time and energy into supporting the project as it stands than it is to try to retrofit or,
Yeah.
come in after the fact. So,
I mean, yes, these open source guys, these developers, they are passionate about it and they do it because they love it. But you know what? They still got to eat. They still got to put
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
roof over their head. So
Yep.
Yeah.
And in the grand scheme of things, again, it's just literally a drop in the bucket to, a 10 million, $100 million company to contribute back like you said, like we're talking a 0.% or something like that, a small percentage.
Yeah. I mean,
Anyway,
it's small change for them.
it is. It is.
Yeah. Okay then. On to security and privacy news. So, in security and privacy, update LibreOffice now to fix a security flaw. So, this is from Londoner. Following up on episode 421's WebP vulnerability we discussed then, it extends beyond your web browsers. LibreOffice has also been found to be affected, so any other application with WebP capability will probably be vulnerable too. LibreOffice has released updates earlier this week. The version in the Mint repos is 7.3.7, but according to LibreOffice, that version is no longer updated. The latest version on the website is 7.6.2. A more stable version 7.5.7 also contains the fix. Download either one from the LibreOffice website directly, links in the show notes. Extract the tar.gz files and install all the deb files. Instructions are also in the README files. There's more information in this article from How to Geek. This seems to be a flaw that doesn't that's just spreading. I'm not saying it's not actually spreading, but we're finding more and more things that are affected by it. Basically, anything that touches the internet in any way seems to be affected.
There's some of the stuff is very. I mean, you're surprised to hear that at times obvious flaws are found, where you'd think a QA process or some sort of like automation would have caught this, and then sometimes things are very clever and something that you wouldn't think of.
Mm-hmm.
So some of it, you deal with best practices. Some of it, you hope that you're smarter than, you know. But there are people that make a lot of money. Not only white hat hackers who are making bug bounty money. I heard of a young kid, like a teenager, making over $1 million in 1 year on bug bounties. So there's a great incentive for people to beat on this code and see if they can break it. But then on the black hat side, there's probably even greater incentive than the bug bounties. So you're right. I think anything that has any value to it that is exposed to the internet, it doesn't necessarily need to be exposed. It could be something where they hacked into a company to get at something that was walled off, not well enough, you know. Um, but yeah, that software, there are vulnerabilities, and some people are very good at doing that. So,
So go on, Eric, for the next one.
speaking of which, Chinese hackers have unleashed a never before seen Linux backdoor from Ars Technica via Londoner. Researchers have discovered a never before seen backdoor for Linux that's being used by a threat actor linked to the Chinese government. The new backdoor originates from a Windows backdoor named Trochilus, that's what I'm going to say, which was first seen in 2015 by researchers from Arbor Networks, now known as NetScout. They say that Trochilus executed and ran only in memory, and the final payload never appeared on disks in most cases. That made the malware difficult to detect. Researchers from NHS Digital in the UK have said Trochilus was developed by apt10, an advanced persistent threat group linked to the Chinese government that also goes by the names Stone Panda and MenuPass. Other groups eventually used it, and its source code has been available on GitHub for more than 6 years. Trochilus has been seen being used in campaigns that use a separate piece of malware known as red leaves. Excuse me. In June, researchers from security group Trend Micro found an encrypted binary file on a server known to be used by a group that they had been tracking since 2021. By searching VirusTotal for the file name libmonitor.so.2, the researchers located an executable Linux file named mkmon. This executable contained credentials that could be used to decrypt the libmonitor.so.2 file and recover its original payload, leading the researchers to conclude that mkmon is an installation file that delivered a decrypted libmonitor.so.2 file. The Linux malware ported several functions found in Trochilus and combined them with a new socket secure SOX implementation. The Trend Micro researchers eventually named their discovery Spry SOX, with Spry denoting its swift behavior and then the added SOX component. Spry SOX implements the usual backdoor capabilities, including collecting system information, opening an interactive remote shell for controlling compromised systems, listing network connections, and creating a proxy based on SOX protocol for uploading files and other data between the compromised system and the attacker-controlled command server. After decrypting the binary and finding Spry SOX, the researchers used the information they found to search VirusTotal for related files. Their search turned up a version of the malware with the release number 1.1. The version Trend Micro found was 1.3.6. The multiple versions suggest that the backdoor is currently under development. The command and control server that Spry SOX connects to has major similarities to a server that was used in a campaign with a different piece of Windows malware known as Red Leaves. Like Spry SOX, Red Leaves was also based on Trochilus. Strings that appear in both Trochilus and Red Leaves also appear in SOX component that was added to Spry SOX. The SOX code was borrowed from the HP socket, a high-performance network framework with Chinese origins. Trend Micro is attributing Spry SOX to a threat actor it has dubbed Earth Luska. The researchers discovered the group in 2021 and documented it the following year. Earth Luska targets organizations around the world, primarily in governments in Asia. It uses social engineering to lure targets to watering hole sites where targets are infected with malware. Besides showing interest in espionage activities, Earth Luska seems financially motivated, with sights set on gambling and cryptocurrency companies. The same Earth Luska server that hosted Spry SOX also delivered the payloads known as Cobalt Strike and WinNTI. Cobalt Strike is a hacking tool used by security professionals and actors alike. It provides a full-scale suite of tools for finding and exploiting vulnerabilities. Earth Luska was using it to expand its access after getting an initial toehold inside of a targeted environment. WinNTI, meanwhile, is the name of both a suite of malware that has been in use for more than a decade, as well as the identifier for a host of distinct threat groups, all connected to the Chinese government's intelligence apparatus, which has been among the world's most prolific hacking syndicates. Monday's Trend Micro report provides IP addresses, file hashes, and other evidence that people can use to determine if they've been compromised. Earth Luska generally infects systems used recently fixed vulnerabilities, often referred to as end days. Timely patching is the best defense. Monday's report provided no additional details on prevention or removal of the malware. Well, that's fun. I love seeing the...
Is this why I've bought or gotten so many emails about me having bought so many iPhones?
Could be.
Or how many things
I love
I've
hearing
purchased
about
using PayPal?
I love hearing about the evolution of these things and how they can see where it's like, well, they just borrowed some code from here and then they took some code from there and then they combined these things and, and well, this was successful, so we'll take that. And it's nefarious and horrible, but it's also kind of fascinating that there's just constant war. If you've ever set up a server that faces the public internet, literally within minutes, and I'm not a networking expert to really understand exactly how all of that works, but it's an incredible feat that literally within minutes of standing up a new server, it's already getting poked. Already getting brute force attacks on SSH ports and port scans, and this is why a lot of times when people are so, talking up self-hosting stuff and go rent a server or get a VPS on DigitalOcean or something, and I just think those companies do very little to secure those systems. There's some very basic sort of security policies in place, and the hardware that's hosting it is probably reasonably secure, the data center and all of that. But the server they give you is pretty much a default vanilla install. And if you don't know how to harden a server, you're probably going to get hacked. You know, and I mean it's that simple. I watch their days, and this is sort of globally. You can watch these charts of activity, and there are certain bot networks on certain days that will just ratchet up their attack vectors, and like your servers will get hit with thousands of requests for brute force attacks and port scans and just all this basic sort of low hanging fruit, and they find so many, and that's why they do it. And computer resources are so cheap that they can just sit there and run these services on very basic hardware. And it's a cat and mouse game.
Okay then. So, I think it is time now to get on to the bi-weekly wanderings.
Woohoo!
Come on then,
Hooray!
Joe.
Well, obviously, I did some 3D printing again. I
You did
chances?
not.
What are the chances? What are the chances?
Crazy talk. I did some printing with Pet G. It's the first time I pulled out in a while. It's okay. The stuff is still difficult to work with, even after drying. Some really small things came out pretty well. I made a drip tip for my atomizer, but it shrunk in the heat from the atomizer. But I'm really excited about making. I 3D printed a pair of MMCX earbuds. If you can see those, if you're looking at the camera. I did that out of Pet G. I was able to take some old 10mm drivers out of the LG HBS headsets that I always remove to replace with the MMCX connection and put them into a better casing, and that really helped the sound quality. The larger area for it to move just seems to really help the sound. Plus, most of the issue I had with them was just the cables breaking. So I also ended up slowing down my prints quite a lot. I dropped the speed down to like 50 millimeters per second, and the quality greatly improved with that. But some of that might have been the S7. So that also made me decide to move away from my old S7 as the brains for my Octopi. The phone itself was still overheating a bit, and I didn't think that it was keeping up very well, and I couldn't use a camera with it. So I pulled out my 4B, my Pi 4B, which I was using as a test bed, but it just kind of sat there for a while. It was really easy to set up with the camera stack, and using the official Pi imager, it pulled the image for me, it wrote it to the micro SD card, and it was set up in no time at all. Now, even putting the speed partway back up with the prints, it's still better, and I've had less issues in regards to extrusion. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it is correlation and not causation, or maybe the Pi just works better for this task. Although I did have to switch out the 0.4 millimeter nozzle again, but I think there was some metal or something that had gotten in with the filament.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
just curious. So I know you're using different types of plastics and things like that.
Mhm.
Has the temperature gone down? And has temperature made any difference, like the temperature in the workshop?
Yeah,
The overall ambient temperature, or
the overall ambient temperature has come down. I mean, when I was having the most problems, you were looking at 116 degrees during the heat of the day. And so there was heat creep, but that
not that big of a deal? Or?
it shouldn't have been as big of a deal as it was, but it was a problem, and I noticed that it got better when the temperatures were lower. It being in the low 90s now is a great improvement, but that might have also been the phone overheating, causing different issues trying to control the machine. So
Yeah, gotcha.
there are a lot of factors that go in there that I haven't accounted for that are actually like hard to separate out. So I also 3D printed some over-ear cans, and because I had 50 millimeter drivers that had been sitting around waiting for this project, and a brand new roll of PLA. I probably should have done something like Pet G for the top part, and I think the design would not have done well in the print stages because Pet G, like I said, is a little bit hard to print with. But I will give it a try eventually just to redo this upper band in Pet G. I like how it turned out, and I was able to use a cable with a microphone in the middle, so it'll work well
nice.
with the devices that I have. Yeah, I had cables lying around, pulled them off, they still worked great. I would like for there to be a bit more clamping force, but
Yeah.
I'll probably have to design my own before I can get that. If you want, you can look up the Armadillo headset on Thingiverse. The original STL was actually designed for 40 millimeter drivers, but a couple of years ago I had made or remade the cup. I had modded the STLs to hold the 50 millimeter drivers, and I did, like I said, a couple of years ago in preparation specifically for this build. I printed those. I was really surprised how well the can and the grill worked, considering how long ago I had made those STLs. And go ahead.
What does the inside look like? The
Um,
cup. I mean,
they,
the grill you just mentioned. Like,
oh
can
yeah,
you
yeah,
face it to the camera?
yeah. There you go.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I
And,
love that color. I know. I told you last night when you showed me the fan, but that color. So if you're not watching it, he has this like bright
Yeah, yeah.
construction barrel orange, or it's a little shocking and really cool looking.
Yeah, but the inside kind of just screws together between the two pieces, so I don't even have to glue in the drivers, so I can take them out and I can work on the backs, which I really appreciate from the design. And so yeah, I can take this, I can break this all the way down and repair it or replace parts as needed, and it's relatively simple. Now, those STLs that I had made several years ago, now at this point, I most of that was just scaling up and then cutting out and re-putting on the hinge portion so that it stayed the same size and everything was scaled from 40 millimeters to 50 millimeters. Not excessively difficult, but I'm really surprised at how well it came out considering how little experience I had at the time. Now, there was a small mistake that I did have to go back in and correct, but it was definitely something that wasn't noticeable until after I had printed it out. So my first test run, I had to go back in and change things, and then after that, it worked out fine. Now, anybody watching the stream, you might have seen me get a package a few minutes ago, and I needed a desk fan for work, so I decided to make my own. Now, a friend that I work with had a couple of extra 120 millimeter fans, and there were some STLs on Thingiverse, and I was able to modify those so that I could mount the thing on a spring clip. And at the time of writing this, I had been waiting for the power adapter to show up, and it showed up during the show. So a $5 little power adapter, and I had a power supply already that I had gotten at the resale for like dirt cheap, a 12 volt adjustable power supply. And I think it actually came out pretty well. And I'll
That
be able
is
to
so
use
cool.
this in my office, and
Yeah.
it just clips onto the side of my desk, and it'll easily fit in my bag.
Check that out,
And
Majid.
yeah, hey Majid,
Isn't
my
that
my homemade desk fan. And then I
That-
added
that's-
these
I was
parts.
gonna say that's serious geek cred, you know.
Yeah,
It is, man.
I,
That
I,
is.
I added these parts to the bottom here, just a little bulking of the plastic, and then I also put a heat set insert, so it'll take a 1/4 inch drive, and it will rotate along the spring clip, and then up and down, like that. And there are some changes that I would make to the SDL that I got on Thingiverse in the future, and that's going to be like putting M5 bolts through the side here instead of wood screws, so that way I can adjust the tension and the angle. And this is running at like the full 12 volts. I had my concerns about vibrations, but really I
Put it near
I
your
can
mic.
hear it, but it is not that loud. This, like I said, full 12 volts.
That's quiet.
Yeah, and I can
That's
turn
awesome.
it down all the way to 3 volts if I want to, and it's
Okay.
yeah, it's blowing a decent amount of air. I'm thinking this will do really well in my work bag. So
Nice.
I'm
Excellent.
quite happy with how this turned out, and thanks to the person that put this on Thingiverse initially, and I don't know if I'll actually ever upload the changes that I made, but yeah, I think this worked out well, and I will be using it.
Love it.
Okay. And then next, I had pulled out my Pine phone, and I reinstalled Manjaro, a new, fresh install of Manjaro on the micro SD card. I had tried Arch, just the plain Arch that it has at first, but I didn't like it, and both of those are Fosh. So Manjaro is just a lot easier to use. I wanted to try out X2Go on there and see if I could get it working. That was the whole reason I pulled it out, because I wanted to be able to hook it up to a screen and have X2Go running, since currently I cannot get Chrome Remote Desktop to work anymore. Now, in installing X2Go, which is in the AUR, I immediately fell into dependency hell and started having flashbacks to my early days of Linux, that whole 2008 to 2010, 12 timeframe. I was able to slog all the way through getting NX installed and X2Go and a bunch of libraries, only to find out that the X2Go client doesn't work on Wayland without a lot more configuration. Now, I didn't think about it at first, it being Wayland, but even after I realized that it was Wayland, I figured, okay, that should only be a real issue for the server. I was wrong. I did find a description of how to get the X11 forwarding working, but I haven't followed it yet. It seems pretty involved to try and get that working on Wayland, so I'm gonna set it aside for a little while and get back to it. Now, also, on my work from home days, I was doing some 3D printing, and I noticed something interesting. It did take me a little bit to get it all put together, but every time I would start a print and try to monitor it using the camera attached to the Pi, my work laptop would disconnect from the internet. Now, evidently, the camera server was saturating the Wi-Fi connection, to the point that nothing else on the same network was able to access the internet. Now, it's easy enough problem to solve, and just run an Ethernet cable to the Pi, but at that time I didn't have one handy. The issue did clear up once I removed the USB camera from the Pi. I was still able to print, but I wasn't able to monitor my prints from a different angle without, oh my God, standing up. Now,
Was that an obvious problem? Like you were able to figure it out really quickly, or did it take you a little bit to kind of like?
it took me a couple of tries. I didn't understand at first why I was disconnecting from work.
Yeah.
And then I realized that, it's okay. It's happening when I kick off a new print on the
Camera
Pi,
feed. Okay.
but it wasn't just because I was kicking off a new print on the Pi. It's because after I kicked off a print, I went over and I restarted the web page, which was viewing the camera.
Ah, okay.
So, yeah, it did take a little while to get the old brain working and add 2 plus 2. Now, I was eventually able to get an Ethernet cable that could reach over to the Pi, and I got it wired to the internet, and switched over, so I was using the new IP address for all my monitoring and control. Now, I have noticed that the Wi-Fi does seem a little bit better, but I haven't worked from home since then to say if it is still being impacted. The Pi was also showing like low power alerts, which is odd because I have the dedicated Pi power supply with like the switch in the middle, and it's supposed to be the proper 3 amps. So I don't know there. It might be a heat issue. Maybe I can find another
That's
one
what
with
I was thinking.
slightly higher power output, but it is something that's mildly concerning. And then I some people that have been watching for a while and paying attention to the or not to the innards, but to the bi-weekly wanderings will remember how in the past I was talking about my Buick needing new window rails in various windows in order for the windows to go up and down. Now it's a very common fault in older Buicks.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing happened in my van that my wife uses, Chrysler Town and Country, on the passenger side. And this happened yesterday, and I have not replaced the rails yet, and it looks like it's going to not be an easy thing to do. It's much more involved than the ones in the Buick, which was enough of a pain in the butt. But last night I did
Does
go
it have
out
like any of the airbags in the door
Oh, no,
or
no,
anything like
no,
that?
no. But
Okay.
it's got, instead of a single rail in the middle, it's got like two rails on the side, and then the motor's a separate piece, and
Oh,
you got to
okay.
dig through a lot more stuff to be able to get to it. Basically, you got to pull off the outer panel and then pull off an inner panel, and then it's attached to the inner panel. So when you mount it back up,
Uh,
that's when you got to reconnect it to the window, which has two holes in it that you got to get. Yeah, it's
that sounds like fun.
yes, fun.
Try not
Okay.
to break any of the clips. That was always my lesson when tearing door
Oh,
panels
I
apart.
I
Don't
did.
break the clips.
I broke one clip. I did. But because of the complexity of okay, so like I said, I wasn't able to replace the rails, and I did have to end up pulling the old rails out. But because they're mounted to that front piece, I wasn't able to do the vice grip fix, which is to push it all the way up and then vice grip to the rail to prevent the window from coming back down. So essentially, what I ended up doing was taking out the rails, and then I had a tension rod like you use to hang stuff up in lockers, or I think they make some that you can use to do pull-ups on and things like that.
Yeah.
And I put a slit in the rubber on one end. And then I jammed that up against the window, and I spread it out and hooked it to a rail that was inside the door to hold it up on the one side. And I didn't have a second one, so I had to cut a piece of dowel on the other side and wedge it in there. And hopefully, it's definitely not an optimal solution, but I'm hoping that it will keep that window closed until I can go and get the rail and try to put it on, because I definitely don't want to pay the $300 to have someone else do it. I'd rather
Oh
pay
my
the
goodness.
$55 to $60 and go and do it myself.
It just anecdotally, I had a BMW 3 Series that was something that consistently I went through. Eventually, had to replace all four windows because it was a sedan, and yeah, like one went 6 months later, another one went. I'm like, wow, they really must have cheaped out on the plastic in those. Except it wasn't the rails necessarily. I think it was more the lifter plate that was
Oh,
sort of under the window.
for
But
Which
for
version BMW was it?
it was a 325i,
Uh,
like a 2007, 2008, somewhere around there.
okay, so that would be. Oh, okay, fine. Okay,
It had a lot of things like that where the plastics, like I don't know if like the electronics, so any of the Bosch parts,
Mm,
which was pretty much everything, and then yeah, a lot of the plastics, and I think the Florida heat had a big part to play in that. I
mm,
think they kind of have mandates, government mandates, where they can, a certain percentage of the vehicle has to be recyclable, and so the plastic, the grade of plastic that they can use is limited by those statutes. I think. That's what I
true,
read. I
but
don't know if it's true, but
true, but I wouldn't have thought so in that generation because I had a BMW of that around about the same age. Mine was 2008 330D,
okay.
and but then I suppose one thing I've always realized is even though they might have um, similar model numbers, often cars in different countries are very different.
Yeah,
And they
yeah.
do sometimes come from different, and there are different rules and regulations.
I,
So
I
maybe,
think
maybe
mine might have been a Mexico build because I know
okay.
BMW builds a lot of cars in Mexico. Not
Mm.
that whatever, the parts are the parts. I mean, it
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
is what it is. But like Joe said, it was like $400 or $500 a pop. You know.
Mm. Well, yeah. I mean, there was one. I remember reading a review of of the BMW, and the guy said, "So normally, all the air within the car, you get that for free, but everything else you have to pay for."
A monthly fee for the heated seats.
Oh God, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
you could spend
Oh, you're
ridiculous
right.
amounts
I
of.
forgot. No, do you hear what Joe said? So you have to pay a subscription to use heated seats.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, all
Yeah.
right. Okay.
And to use all the power of the engine in some cases.
It's getting out of hand. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Unbelievable.
unfortunately, there are people who are willing to pay. So,
Yeah.
if people are willing to pay, then there will be somebody willing to sell it to
I'm
them.
willing to hack the operating system in your car so the frickin' heated seats turn on when you want them to.
I've often wondered how difficult it would be to hack into a Tesla, actually.
Mm, I don't know, but with the heated seats, if nothing else, I could wire directly into the heating element and just apply power directly.
Switch. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. We're just joking, folks. We're not really trying to like sabotage your cars and
Oh, that's not sabotaging your car.
make you
That's
fry.
making it work for you.
Right to repair.
Anyway, we should move on to my wanderings. So, since I've been on last time, I've been a bit quiet on the distro front. I've managed to resist the urge to distro hop on my main machine again. I'm using Ubuntu with the GNOME desktop. As I'd mentioned last time, I'd never really used GNOME on a desktop PC before. I'd always really used it on laptops and convertibles. And it's fine. I mean, now you could say I'm used to it. Um, but it seems to be good. It gets out of the way. Everything's reasonably simple to use.
What is the
Um,
distro?
it's just Ubuntu, vanilla Ubuntu,
Oh,
23,
Ubuntu. Okay. Okay.
2304.
Gotcha.
And yeah, it seems to be, as I said, on desktops I'd never really used it. I'd always put like something like Mint or Kubuntu or something with a bit more traditional uh, interface.
Hmm.
But this seems to work fine. Um, so yeah, that's fine. I was invited again onto Linux OTC last week, and it was a really fun time. It was good sparring with the lads and hearing heresy from Leo about Apple and how great Apple are.
Says the
It
man who
seems that
keeps
my
buying Apple devices.
I haven't got any more. Well, I've only got one left, and that's still on sale. I'm just waiting for the day that iPad Mini goes, and I can say I'm an Apple-free household again. It's never okay. So actually, when I was listening to Leo last week when he was talking about Apple and all that sort of stuff, it really did make me realize that you do need it works really well if you've got the whole ecosystem. It's just a big ask to kind of jettison everything else to get locked into an ecosystem which you then can't get out of, and it may work really well, um, but it's a very expensive, um, and actually not as performant way of doing what you want to do. And that might be my own biases, to be honest. I mean, I'm the kind of guy that watches WWDC and then gets irritated by the fact that it's like Apple have just invented you know USB-C, or Apple have just invented Touch ID or something like that. And it's like Apple reminds me of the good-looking girl at school that you fancy, you really like, but every time you get close to her, you realize that she's an absolute cow and a really nasty person.
Yeah.
So you just walk away again. And
Yep.
then a couple of days later, you see her again, and she's a good-looking lass. So you go up to try and chat her up again, and then again you remember exactly what it is you hated about her. My wife
Have you
is
ever
whispering
actually
something.
had any Apple devices though? Just out of
Yes.
curiosity.
Oh yeah. No. I mean, so over the last 6 months, I've had about an iPad Mini Air. Sorry, an iPad Air, an iPad Mini, a MacBook, Intel MacBook Air, Intel MacBook Pro, and an M1 MacBook Air. I've n-
Okay, so the answer is yes.
yeah. No, but I mean, so at the risk of going through stuff all over again, as I said, I've never liked Apple devices. I
You just wanted to be
yep.
really sure.
No, but the thing was, I saw the M1 chip, and its battery life and its performance, and I just thought that's just amazing that you can make something like that.
Yeah,
And
it
then
is.
the fact that they put it into an iPad. So I thought, and now I'd only ever bought a iPad mini, the original iPad mini back in 2012. And at that point I'd bought it for work, got a keyboard, everything like that, and it was just a complete disaster. This is a time when Apple didn't even have a file manager. You couldn't even download files onto the device. You had to share Dropbox links as links rather than the actual document. So I then I'd never had any intention of going back to it. That lasted about 3 months. It then went to my kids, who then used it for a couple of years as a YouTube machine. And then but when I saw that they now brought the M1 chip into the iPad Air 5th generation 2022, I thought, whoa, this is a desktop class, a very good desktop class chip in an iPad. I wonder if I can actually get work done on an iPad. Apple keep doing all these nauseating commercials, what's a computer type of things. And so I thought, well, let's try it out. And plus, it's cheaper than buying an M1 MacBook. Well, is it really? Because by the time I bought the iPad Air and the Magic Keyboard and the pencil, I wasn't that far off if I just bought a bloody MacBook. Anyway, I tried that out and I found that it was just extremely annoying. And the reason why it was annoying was, and I think I mentioned this once in, can't remember if it was OTC or on here. It's about workflow. When you've been using computers for as long as I have, I know I'm not a developer or anything like that, but I've been using computers since I was 7 years old. You get into a particular way of doing things, and having to relearn all of that, it made me understand why people were so annoyed with GNOME 3 when it first came out, because they were having to relearn a lot of the things that they did. Um, and after a while, it just started annoying me, and I just thought, okay, this has been a absolutely and interest. And ironically, but once you've got all the devices put together, it's not actually that portable. The Magic Keyboard is actually quite heavy. And an iPad, 10-inch iPad Air with a Magic Keyboard and pencil is heavier than an M1 MacBook.
Hmm.
So it actually becomes less portable, which I thought was ridiculous as well. Anyway, I then decided to get rid of it, but by now I was starting to get not much, but slightly invested in the Apple ecosystem. I'd had a couple of apps that were through the App Store. I had a couple of purchases, this, that, and the other. So, and then we had our cat sitting experiment, which I'll get to in the wanderings as well. Which and the cats had air tags. So I got an iPad Mini, um, and it's fine, but there's nothing great about it. I mean, there's nothing on it that I couldn't do on an Android tablet. In the meantime, I found online a cheap Intel MacBook Pro from 2017. When it came, I realized why it was cheap. The thing had about a battery life of 10 minutes.
Oh,
Yeah, it had to be plugged in constantly. This was my first time using Mac OS, and I did not like Mac OS.
hmm.
Again, workflow came into it. Just little things I couldn't do, and the way I was used to doing things. So within 24 hours, I managed to put Arch on it, which was fine. And then it was kind of like, well, why have I bought a MacBook if I'm just going to put Arch on it, or whatever distro?
Yeah.
Now thankfully, I'd actually got that on a good deal, and so I was actually able to sell it for a profit. I then thought, okay, I'm going to have one last go, and I found a deal on eBay for an M1 MacBook Air, and the battery life was insane. It was extremely portable. The keyboard was really good. Apps seemed to work quite well. The But I couldn't use it any more than I would have just used a tablet, because the operating system kept getting in the way. So I couldn't do anything significant on it.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, okay, this is just not working out. I've given it, this has all happened over a 18-month period or so, maybe just a bit less than that. So okay, it's like, all right, I've done my Apple experiment. No, thank you.
But that's long enough. I mean, 18 months is, it's not like you tried it for a month and we're like, You know,
Yeah.
just give up
I
on it.
did, I
So
did, I gave it a good shot.
yeah,
And but so it's not for me, and it's like this how I mentioned on OTC that for some people it's fine if that's what they like. That's great if the convenience and the reliability and the utility of the device is good enough for them that they can manage without some of the foibles of the operating system. That's fine. I thought I would be like that, but surprising to my own surprise, I kind of wasn't. It did annoy me. It did get in the way. Um, but hey, everybody has their biases, everybody has their things, and I've realized that I've spoken for about 10 minutes on one thing, and I've still got a whole lot of wanderings to
no,
get to.
it's a very relevant topic though, because I think a lot of people struggle with it. Because Android isn't exactly an open platform if you're buying an Android phone, and Apple likes to say, especially if you're privacy focused, Apple likes to say that their privacy practices are better than Android's are. And so there's this sort of tug of war, and I go through it every time I get a new phone. I'm like, should I try an iPhone? Because people like Leo plant that bug in your ear, right? Or like you
Yeah.
said about the good, the attractive person that you're drawn toward, and then you realize, oh, that's pretty superficial, and I'm not really happy. But
Yeah.
I've done the same thing as you. I've experimented several times, and then I ultimately end up going away from Apple because of some weird, rule or
Yeah.
restriction limitation. So
Yeah.
anyway,
There'll be
I don't
there'll
want
be
to beat a
some
dead
point.
horse, but I don't think you should feel bad about you know the struggle.
No, 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 no. I mean, I don't feel bad about the struggle, but what I mean is that it's um it's different strokes for different folks, and
Yeah,
it's even when when I try something, I try and go in with an open mind. I don't go in with my own preconceived prejudices and preconceptions and
yeah,
preconceived ideas, and I gave it a shot, and
yeah.
it just nah, I just couldn't do it. And even though okay, I made money on that Intel MacBook, but everything else I lost money on. I was like, you know what, no, no, thank you.
All right. Well,
It's not my thing. Anyway, um, it seems that my podcasting life is starting to bleed into my work. This is my point about compartments. More people at work have been asking me about the various podcasts I've been on and whether I've come on as a guest or if, host such as this. Um, so if you find an uptick in listeners from central England, you'll know why. The fact that I'm the resident techie in our hospital and the above notoriety about being a podcaster means that I'm suddenly supposed to know a lot about anesthesiology simulation. So, critical incidents, so life-threatening things that occur, need to be practiced. But at the same time, you don't want to be practicing them for real. You need to, because that's obviously not good for patient safety, and you don't want to be doing that, in a where it has a real-world impact. So in anesthesia, we have a lot of simulation sessions, and these can go all the way from quite lo-fi. You've got a mannequin, and you set up a monitor, and you tell the people, okay, this is what's happened now. Okay, now this is what's happened now. Okay, now this is what's happened now. To quite high fidelity sim wards where you can, yes, you'll still have a mannequin, but you can make the mannequin shake as if it's having a fit. You can make it blink. You can make it say stuff. You can make an procedure difficult or easy. You can block the throat, swell the throat, like as if you're having an allergic reaction. And but I haven't actually had a huge amount of training on these really high fidelity uh, devices, and so I'm actually going to be doing some of that tomorrow, actually, um, and we'll see how that is. We did run a lo-fi session earlier in the week, and even that was really beneficial for the junior doctors because it's surprising, even however unreal it seems when you're in the scenario, when you're actually there, and you can, I had apps and whatever that could simulate blood pressures and falling oxygen levels and stuff like that. It's amazing how much people get into it. um and we had some really good feedback about it, actually. So I think hopefully with the training tomorrow on the high fidelity stuff, we'll be able to do a bit more of this, so that again, we can practice, because you don't want to practice how to deal with a life-threatening allergy when the life-threatening allergy happens. You want to be able to know what to do beforehand. Strikes are still going on at the hospital. The next one is this week, with both the junior and senior doctors walking out at the same time. I've made my feelings pretty clear. I think the last time I support them, but I don't think they're going to work. Let's see, who knows? I mean, apparently I've heard some conciliatory things from the doctors' union, who really brought their demands low down. But again, this bunch of feckless bastards that our government don't really seem to care. I upgraded my personal phone. I used to have an Oppo Find X5 Pro, which is the one that I took to Morocco and got some very good photographs. But I think something happened. Something happened to the phone while I was there. I don't know what exactly, but ever since I've come back, the battery life was appalling. Now I have there were a couple of instances when we were out in the desert where the phone kind of switched off because it was got too hot. Because it was what for? Okay, I've got to translate it into yours, isn't it? It was 105 or something like that. And so I don't know whether that actually did some lasting damage to the battery, or whether it's just the fact that I've had it for a while. I don't know. Anyway,
So,
I
when did it get hot?
when I was out in the desert.
You said it was 105. I was asking when did it get hot?
What, the phone?
It's a
No, no,
it's
no,
a
no.
joke.
When did
It's a
Oh,
joke.
oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. No worries.
He
Okay,
lives in Texas. 105 is like a cool day.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
right. Yeah. Hey, look, I live in England. For God's sake, we've never seen 105 in our lives. Um. So anyway, um, I went for a OnePlus 11. I've been seeing reviews about it all during the year. It all seemed to have pretty good reviews. And the way I thought to myself is, well, let's see how quickly I can sell the old one. And if I sell it at a reasonable price at reasonably quickly, then I'll buy the new one. And I managed to sell it within half an hour of putting it on eBay. That's the quickest I've ever sold anything. In fact, technically, it wasn't even ready to post. I hadn't even wiped it yet. I was still at work, and um, and I don't know why. Maybe somebody really wanted that phone. But hey ho, as I said, I sold it within half an hour. I got an interest-free credit deal when I was buying it as well, so I was able to spec it up to a slightly higher spec, 16 gig RAM, 256 gig storage. Although to be honest, I think 256 should be standard now. It's got to that stage. I've been a bit of a OnePlus aficionado because I've had a OnePlus 3, I've had a 3T, I've had a 5, I've had a 5T, I've had a 6 twice, 7 Pro, a Nord, and an 8 Pro. I actually have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the brand. And there'll be times when I get it and I'd love the device unbelievably. And there'll be other times when I get one and it's just something stupid that OnePlus have done which will annoy me. So, for example, I remember when I had the 5T and the Netflix app didn't have HD support, and this was available in a software update, but for some reason you had to send the phone back to OnePlus and they had to apply the update and then send it back to you. And I was like, I'm sorry, what a bunch of amateurs. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah. Um, and so yeah, I had this. And after I'd had the 8 Pro, I thought to myself, I'm not gonna go down. I'm not gonna get another OnePlus. And the 9 and 9 Pro devices were expensive. There's a really good video there's two really good videos. One by MKBHD and one by, oh, I can't remember his name now. The guy who does Tech Alter, Friday Checkout. He's a
I'm
European
not
guy.
sure.
I can't remember his name. I can picture his face, but I can't remember his name. He's also involved in that Nebula streaming service. Anyway, um, where they basically talked about how these kinds of small in inverted commas brands, they come onto the scene, they're disruptive, flagship specs at a killer price, and then they do the they do the Batman thing. You know, they either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain, which is what they did. And by the time you got to the OnePlus 10, there was nothing really different between a OnePlus and say a Galaxy S22 or a Google Pixel or whatever. You know, it was just another brand. This does seem to be a much stronger device. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is a very good chip. It's a very power efficient chip. They've sorted their cameras out. Their screens have always been good. They've sorted the software out. There'd been real issues when they moved to Android 12 because they were merging the. So OnePlus is owned by Oppo as the parent company, and their Android distribution, Oxygen OS, got merged into the larger Color OS that they were using on the Oppo phones. And something happened around Android 12, which just completely broke that model, and they had to pretty much start from scratch again. Um, Now the software is fine, and it works pretty well. But I mean, you'd have random errors before, like for example, you know, your Google Pay would just stop working for reasons who knows what exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, in one sense, you could say it's more of an Oppo phone than it has been before, which is after all its parent brand. But actually, that's probably not a bad thing. At least it makes the software more stable. The screen's great. The camera's blooming good. I don't know if I would say it's as good as a Pixel, but it's bloody good. The performance is great. I'm not seeing a single stutter on it at all. I've The thing about the screen I was going to say, the difference between that and previous OnePlus is that it also has Dolby Vision support, which you might think, well, does it really make a difference? Once you notice it, it's again one of these things that when you notice it, you notice it, and then if you go back to something that hasn't got it, you notice the difference. If you know
Yeah.
what I mean.
Yep. Absolutely.
Um, the feature I the feature I find most indispensable is the fast charging. I mean, really fast charging, not fake fast charging like we see in Apple, Google, and Samsung with, 25 watt, 30 watts. I mean, this is a 100 watt super VOOC charger. Goes from absolutely dead to 100% in 25 minutes. And once you're used to it, it is a game changer because your battery anxiety has completely disappeared. You don't worry about it at all. You know that even if you only get a 10-minute window to charge your phone, if I'm at work or something like that, then that 10 minutes will get me the rest of the day without a problem. Plus the fact that this is a quite a power efficient chip. I mean, I'm ending my normal days where I'm watching stuff, Spotify streaming, listening to podcasts, doom scrolling Twitter. Although I'm doing less of that now because Elon Musk has locked me out of my Twitter, which is just as well, I think. I'll talk about that in a sec. Um, and I'm still ending the day with like 50%, which is just nuts. Um, but again, you know, if you can put it on for the onto the charger for 10 minutes and it goes up to something ridiculous, that's just amazing. Now, some would say, what's the point? And won't it harm the battery? Well, this has been tested, and a couple of YouTubers, MKBHD has a good video on this, shows that actually there's no real significantly worse battery degradation than what you would get normally with normal charging because of the way that they have designed the cells, having split cells and sharing the wattage and all this kind of stuff. As for what's the point, because you might say, well, we've all got access to plugs and cables and stuff like that. Well, I think it's not unsurprising that these innovations come from phones which are big players in China and India. OnePlus is massive in India. OnePlus has lots of its variants of its phones in India. I've seen OnePlus shops. Last year when I went to India, there was OnePlus stores. Like you'd have Google stores and Apple stores over here. And a place like India, Pakistan, places like that,
Well,
electricity can be a little bit. The infrastructure can be a bit hit and miss.
hmm.
I know places where they have regular what they call load shedding. Most apartment complexes have their own generator. A lot of places have what they call inverters, which will charge during while they have electricity, and then if the electricity gets cut, that's then used to power the rest. So in that scenario, you know, you might you might only have 15, 20 minutes to charge your phone before your electricity goes. So in that scenario, I think you can see why it's actually really useful. Um, is apparently even a Realme, which is a sister brand of Oppo, which has a 240-watt charging brick, which charges from dead to 100 in 12 minutes. I'm not sure if that's actually available in the West, but that was insane, I thought. I suppose for me in the UK, it's just a nice perk, and with the kind of job that I have, it makes sense. It's more useful to me than wireless charging. Wireless charging being something that has been omitted from this version of the OnePlus. See, I can imagine how that would annoy some people. The OnePlus does shit like that, um, but for me, it's okay. Um, the thing about Twitter, I I found that when I changed the phone, I got logged out, as you do. I then tried to log back in, and for some reason, it it doesn't seem it doesn't seem to recognize me. Doesn't want to let me log in. Keeps telling me my username is wrong. When I try and get a forget password, it sends an email to an email address which I retired some time ago for some reason, and so I have been forced to get off Twitter, and I'm actually feeling a lot better for it. So yeah. Anyway, I'm quite liking the AMD Lenovo laptop that I've bought. It's a Lenovo Yoga convertible pen, all that sort of jazz. It's the first Ryzen laptop I've had. It's got good performance and good battery life. I haven't got around to putting a distro on it yet. I might put Arch because why not? I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And then finally, I can say to Bill, I too use Arch, by the way. You know. So I remember last time I was talking about these Beats headphones earbuds that I bought, and that I was a bit disappointed with them. They were fine, but there was nothing great about them. And so I sent them back, and I got some Sennheisers. Now these were really good when it came to audio quality. They sounded really nice. They had a good EQ that you could then mess with. The app was good, everything like that. But I didn't find them that comfortable, and I tried all sorts of things. I tried different tips. I tried all sorts, maybe I've just got weird ears, but I just, after about an hour, I'd get actual pain, from one of my ears. Normally the right one for some reason, but um, and so with a heavy heart, I returned them because there's no point in having great audio if you can't keep them in your ears. I went for a Earfun Air Pro 3. So this is one of these kind of new brands that's come up. They've got some good reviews because they provide ANC and decent sound at a reasonable price. I mean, these cost me what, $60, something like that. And they've got the kind of Apple AirPods style, with the stem and all that sort of shape. And I could understand now why so many people copy that because it's a really comfortable shape. I mean, they're really light. They're really comfortable. I keep them on I can keep them on for many hours without getting any pain, and the sound's good. And so I quite like them actually. It's also quite a good. The company I think is still relatively new. If you register with them, they send you like tips and tricks and extended warranties. And I've read in the reviews that people have had problems. They've been able to contact them and get new devices sent out to them. So our experience with cat sitting has finally ended today. The owners have come and picked them up while I've been doing the podcast. Actually, they picked up one of them 2 weeks ago, and we're planning to get the other one last week. But then my wife very inconveniently decided to get COVID. I don't know if you've heard of that virus before. Apparently, it's quite bad. She's fine, but yeah. So they came tonight and took all the stuff. And I don't know if you guys have read 1984 by George Orwell, but I feel like Winston in 1984. Having spent years denying my daughter a cat and my wife a cat, I think we're going to buy one now. I quite liked having one. It was quite nice. We had it for almost 3 months. It was a nice cat. It was a rag doll. I've now, but see, if we are going to buy, and I have to learn something about keeping a pet. I've never had a pet before in my life, and I don't think kids count, although
Um,
they do feel like it sometimes. Um, so I've had to read about different breeds and what kind of health things you have to do and pet insurance and blah de blah and
yeah,
blah de
pet
blah.
insurance
Yeah.
sucks, but no, just something y- you don't have to listen to me on this one, but my preference is to not buy a cat from a breeder unless you like know
Okay.
them personally. My whole thing is go to a rescue and get a cat from a rescue.
So yeah, so I was thinking about that actually. I was thinking about that. Um, but again, I don't. I mean, I don't know how the how they'll behave, or they'll behave differently.
If
People
you get
talk
him as
about
a
certain
kitten,
breeds being really, more playful, and this one was a rag doll. So my daughter's like, oh, let's get a rag doll because that's the one we had. That's what Oreo was, you know. Um, but yeah, I mean, no, my initial impulse was to go for one of those rescue cats. But anyway, uh, it's the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad this week. Not all Muslims commemorate this, but we will be. So I may not be able to do Linux OTC this week. I'll be at my local Islamic center because there'll be a function there. I've started to watch Battlestar Galactica, the 2000s version, not the 1980s one. It regularly tops the rankings of great sci-fi. It is good, but I think because of when it was made, it's not bingeable in the way that more modern sci-fi like The Expanse or other things that you find on Netflix or Disney or whatever, because a lot of them are designed to be kind of consumed in, you know, a few number of sittings. This is very much feels quite, I wouldn't say episodic because that's not fair, but yeah, it's not the kind of thing you watch and it's like, oh, I need to watch the next one, see what happens, or I need to see the next one, see what happens. Um, It is, but it is good though. It is good. I'm enjoying the second season of Foundation. Um, More sci-fi. Although, in my personal opinion, and I know this is actually against what most reviewers have said, I don't think it's as good as the first season, personally. Um, but yeah, it's good fun. I've also now got Silo to watch as well. I've heard that. I've heard good reviews about that. So that's the next thing on the list to watch. So that's my wanderings done. Over to you, Eric.
All right. Well, I've been spending a lot of time looking at different distributions, using my usual method of trying them out in a virtual machine, and then if something is, interesting enough, different enough, whatever sort of catches my attention, then I'll try it on physical hardware. I looked at, let's see, Debian 12, LMDE6, Bunsen Labs, Ultramarine, RizzyOS, Open Mandriva Rome, Seduction, and then I just started looking at Ubuntu 2310 beta as well. So, um, and I've just installed them all and just sort of done, half an hour of playing around on all of them. There were several others that I just disqualified, and I kind of keep a list of things that are interesting to me, not only for podcasts and stuff, but also just because things that I want to try and really put on hardware and really I find a lot of interesting things whenever I go through that process. But it is time consuming, but enjoyable. So I keep doing it. Um,
So
also been go, go ahead.
two quick questions.
Hmm.
What do you use for your VMs? What software do you use?
I use either VirtualBox or Virt Manager.
Okay.
Um, it Quick Emu is another one that I will use every so often. So it really just depends. Sometimes VirtualBox is probably like the easiest in most cases, but I don't know. Sometimes it just doesn't work as well with a certain distribution, and so if I'm having problems with it, then I'll use Virt Manager. I
So
also like
I've
Virt Manager for headless stuff. So if I'm testing out server software, I'll use Virt Manager for that as well.
I've used GNOME boxes, and I found that
Hmm.
quite. It was quite straightforward and easy to use. Um, that's might be an option to try if it is just a case of just seeing what something looks like, rather than testing more thoroughly. Do you have a test laptop which you use for all this?
No, I just tend to use the one that I have. Every laptop that I get, I end up giving to someone that I know needs a system. So, like, unlike a lot of people that are in this sphere, I don't have, a bunch of extra hardware laying around. I have my desktop computer, and then I have my main laptop, and I dual boot on both of them. So it gives me the opportunity to use 4 different distros at any given time.
I feel
So
attacked.
sorry, what?
I feel attacked.
No, 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 no. Trust me, I would. I just it happens to be that every time I get in a system that someone either doesn't want or you know doesn't want to fix, if I find something wrong with it or whatever, I will fix it, and then invariably it's like, oh, this person needs a system, or so I just, I figure instead of me keeping it in the closet and just using it occasionally, that I just end up giving it away. So
So, I mean, I've been tempted to get a test laptop, um, that would only use for messing around, and uh, so I don't really care if it does work or doesn't work, because I've got production machines that I would use. Um, so I've often thought about doing that. So I just wondered if that was something that you've done. And I have heard people on other podcasts talk about, I tried this distro on my test laptop. So I just wondered if that was the same thing that you used to do. Sorry, I
yeah,
interrupted your
no, no,
wandering.
no, it's fine. I had considered at one point using an icy dock, if you've ever heard of that, where you can switch between 2 or 4 different hard drives, and
Hmm.
it fits into a tower PC, and you literally just switch between them, and then that way you could have a bunch of different, and I could do that. I have a lot of drives in my desktop. I figure there's no reason for me to have like more than a certain number going at any given time, because it gets a little eclectic, and I'd rather just
Hmm.
focus. But my next point is something I've been trying to find, which is a Linux based tablet,
Hmm.
which would give me another system to test on, um, especially an older piece of hardware, because my laptop has 16 or 32 gigs of RAM and 11th gen processor, and like it's pretty modern. And so I think sometimes I like to test out an older system or a less powerful system to see, because basically everything runs well on these systems because they're modern and very beefy, and so it's even hard to tell the difference between distros, where it's like someone else will say, oh, it ran really slow, or this one was faster than normal. And to me, it's all pretty homogenous, because if you have fast hardware, everything kind of runs the same. So having an older system, but yeah, the itch I've had lately that I'm trying to scratch is having a Linux based tablet specifically, literally a 2-in-1, that you can take the body off, the keyboard off as a cover and as a keyboard, and then just have it at work as a tablet and the touch interface. But then if you want to do some productivity work, you can put the tablet cover on and then have a keyboard and uh, a touchpad as well, and sort of an all in one device. And the things that come to mind with something like that are like a Microsoft Surface device, Surface Pro, PC based hardware, not ARM based. And so I started doing some digging around and found Lenovo made an IdeaPad Mix 510. It was released in December of 2016 and positioned as a Microsoft Surface 4 competitor. So it has the same chipsets and basically the same specs, and also is very physically similar, where it's the same sort of dimensions, and also has that same sort of kickstand that flips out from the bottom of the back of the tablet screen device portion of the device. So it has a 12.2 IPS screen that runs at 1920 by 1200 and 307 nits of brightness. So probably wouldn't be great outdoors, but don't think would ever use it outside. It has a 6th gen Skylake i5 6200U processor running at 2.3 gigahertz, and it's a dual core 4 thread um, chip, and it has 8 gigs of RAM, a 256 NVMe M.2 drive, Bluetooth 4.0, 802.11 AC, Wi-Fi, headphone jack, a USB 3 Type A, and a USB C, and then a barrel power connector. And then I love that the detachable keyboard has a inbuilt touchpad, and it's decent size, like 3 inches by 3.3 inches by 1.8 inch. So it's not huge, but it's big enough to actually use. And if I needed to do something where I needed better, more finite control, I would just use an external mouse. And but the keyboard is backlit, which a lot of these usually aren't backlit keyboards, and I really like that feature as well. Supposedly an 8-hour battery life with Windows, but I don't think that's going to be happening, both because the batteries are pretty old at this point, and also just because I don't tend to have that good of battery performance out of Linux. Um, so, I mean, the specs, it's not going to be like a rip-roaring powerhouse, workstation machine, but the balance here is something that runs, it is powerful enough to run actual Linux applications, but still be a portable tablet style device. And so and also be inexpensive. And so this is sort of hitting all of those, ticking all those boxes for me. So,
So I actually had this exact model, although I had mine only had 4 gigs of RAM, and it was a Skylake i3 6100U.
okay.
Had 256 NVMe. Everything else was exactly the same, um, and it was probably one of my longest lasting devices.
No?
I remember buying it in 2017. So, it wasn't that old then.
Mm-hmm.
And it continued till it continued to early 2022.
Okay.
I was using it till then, and it was still working. And it was only because I decided that I was going to try this whole iPad challenge and all this, try Apple, and I gifted it to someone who I know does a lot of uh like lot of document work, so signing documents,
Mm-hmm.
annotating PDFs and stuff like that. And so I know that's what he does a lot of. So I gave it to him as a gift. And as I said, yeah, it lasted a long time. It wasn't my main device, um, but it did everything I needed it to do. It was a little bit underpowered, be honest, but
Right.
I
Yep.
mean, but then but I said I had the 4 gig version, so I had even less RAM, and mine was an i3. Um,
Yeah.
Ubuntu worked absolutely fine on it, um, and it was quite nice, touchscreen, GNOME, that kind of thing. Actually, to be fair, I don't think my keyboard was backlit. I think mine was. No, mine wasn't backlit, I remember. But again, I think that's because I had the slightly cheaper version. I've
Yeah.
also actually recently bought the slightly newer version of this, the IdeaPad Mix 520, which is from 2018.
Okay.
I bought that for my son, um, who he started college, and it's again very similar specs. It's got 8 gig, it's got 8 gigs, 256 SSD. It's got a whatever the eighth gen is, i5 8000 something U, and yeah, it's got the kickstand and the pen and all that sort of stuff. And I haven't. I mean, I used to use when because I initially bought it for myself, and then when knowing that he needed it, I just kind of just gave it to him straight away. So I didn't use it that long. But when I used it with Ubuntu, it was fine. I put it back to Windows, and he seems to be finding it all right. Not had any issues with his kind of work. So and I got it for really quite cheap. I mean, it was what, $200, I think. And so I'm a big fan of this. I'm not sponsored by Lenovo, but if Lenovo want to sponsor me, I'm available and I'll take any freebies you want to give me. Um, I have no problems with that. It does not affect my ethics in any way, shape, or form. But joking aside, I'm a fan of this, and I think if you're clever and you look for the right generation and the right spec, you can get some really good deals out there.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that you didn't jump all over that $80 one, Eric.
Oh, I know, and it's still out there. And that was the part that I was waiting to hear. I wanted to go and see that people were having decent luck running Linux on it because I really only found one article that was talking about Debian 10 and 11, and that everything worked except the cameras, which again, like that wouldn't be a huge breaking point for me, but it would be nice to at least have the front-facing one for meetings, stuff like that.
I mean, the
So
general rule seems to be that Lenovo are pretty good when it comes to Linux support, which is a good thing.
right, right. Well, that's great. Yeah, and I think I will look to see if there's a 520 and what the price range is for those. But I agree with you. I think there's a whole raft of equipment that just when Windows gets long in the tooth and just doesn't
Yeah.
run well on these devices, that Linux will run very nicely on them. And so that's kind of what I've been looking for. And honestly, if the experience is good enough, then I'll just get rid of the Galaxy Tab S8 Plus that I have, which is a one like you said with your Apple devices. It's a wonderful physical piece of hardware. The screen is beautiful, like the build quality, everything's really nice on it. But Android is just not a great tablet operating system, and there just
Yeah.
aren't a lot of good apps for it. And
iPad OS is worse. At least Android has a file. See, genuinely, I mean, and I know that's a low bar because Android is not a great tablet OS,
yeah,
but it's it's even worse because at least Android has a file structure and a file system, and you
yeah.
can cut and paste and stuff like
Well,
that.
you're talking about the iPad Pro, and what could you do on it? And as you're saying it, I'm thinking, well, yeah, the chip's amazing and the hardware's amazing, but the OS is really the big
Yeah,
limitation.
yeah. I mean, those are really the situations of having a V8 engine in a Nissan Micra.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of
it's kind of silly. Yeah, I hear you.
yeah, yeah.
So besides, doing that, and I probably will just end up getting something this week. But besides looking at that hardware and the Linux distros, I've just been participating in a lot of podcasts. So Linux OTC, Linux Lugcast, and this one, Linux and mintCast. So it's just a lot of fun. I really enjoy talking to you guys and meeting other people, and it keeps my interest. So there's always my technical geeky interest in hardware and software and all that stuff, but my wife has no interest in ever hearing me talk about it at all, and no one in my family is technically inclined really, and I don't have an outlet for you know just asking a question to someone. I end up learning a lot from listening to you guys and your experiences, and so it's just a very enriching part of my life to participate. So I hope I can just keep doing that. So
Well,
that's
you've been a great addition, and you paper over all my deficiencies. So great. So
we
I
work
love
well
that.
together.
Okay, then. So that's enough for the wanderings. Now onto the Linux innards. So, in the Linux innards, we are going to discuss a little bit something that had been discussed a couple of episodes ago about mobile phone operating systems and Linux on mobile phone operating systems. Now, some people think Android is Linux, some people think Android is not Linux. I personally am of the opinion that Android is Linux because it uses a Linux kernel, but it's not GNU/Linux, which is what we are used to using on the desktop. Um,
Yeah, I have to agree
and
with you there,
so,
but I also have
mhm,
to. We kind of have to preface this a little bit. A lot of this was written by Moss, so thank you, Moss. We understand you didn't want to be on the show because of personal stuff, but this is appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Moss. You are a star. Um, so one of the things that, and not only does it have it has have a Linux kernel, it also has, at least in some way, the kind of Linux philosophy, if you want to put it that way, in that there is an Android open source project. So whenever you have an Android distribution, and I think Android distribution, one of my friends, Matteo Doni, who's on Tech Travel Geeks and used to be on All About Android, good, good guy, friend of mine. We used to be on a podcast of about mobile phones 5 6 years ago together, and he said the best way to think about these Android skins is that they are different distros in the way that in Linux you have different distros, you know, Ubuntu, Mint, Arch, Debian, whatever, and some have one particular focus, some have other particular focuses. They are different enough that you can't just say that these are just kind of a desktop environment or a launcher on top of Android. You know, there are some significant differences underneath. And so one of Android's greatest strengths and the source of occasional frustrations is its wide variety of software variations. You have the Android open source project, which is kind of sponsored by Google, AOSP, but then that is then taken by the hardware vendors, you know, Samsung, Sony, and Google themselves, and add some stuff to it. Another example, kind of analogy, would be Chromium and Google Chrome. And so all the kind of Android variants that you see, whether it's One UI, whether it's Oxygen OS, Color OS, the Pixel launcher, etc., you know, they're all based on the Android open source project. Since it's open source, anyone's free to review and contribute code and fixes to the repository. However, Google oversees its general direction and has a final say in the bulk of its development. It does receive regular bug fixes, which get packaged and delivered to Android smartphones in the form of monthly security patches. And Google unveils major new features each year at its I/O conference with yearly releases like Android 13. Now, these aren't always without incident. So, this year, for example, Android 14 should have been out by now, but something has happened, some critical bug has happened that has delayed it. And it's interesting that actually now the betas for Android 14.1, which they call QPR, you know, quarterly project releases, but it's the equivalent of point releases, have started coming out before the main one has. So there's something going on. I wouldn't be surprised actually if it's to do with that vulnerability we've been talking about, the libwp thing. Anyway, in addition to being open to contributions, Android open source is free to use and under an open source license. Um, Most manufacturers like Samsung, Sony, Google take the Android open source and fork it. Well, they build on top of it, but some fork it like we would fork a distro. So Amazon have their Fire OS, and Huawei have what they now call Harmony OS, which had to be done in that way because of the sanctions that were put on by the US government. It's also important that most phone manufacturers obtain versions of AOSP from chipset vendors like Qualcomm. And this is because Android has to be tailored to a wide variety of hardware. You've got the most low end, cheap $15-20 devices, all the way up to the $1,800 foldable Samsungs and Googles. Um, it's also been a general cause for delayed Android updates and limited years of update support. When you compare the kind of support that Android manufacturers have been giving their devices, it's always fallen short of Apple. Um, Things are getting a lot better now. Samsung now commit to 5 years of updates, which is actually more than Google, because Google actually only commit to 4 years of updates. But you used to have really ridiculous situations. Like, for example, I remember my son had a OnePlus, which was on Android 11, and it was guaranteed one platform update only. and it was kind of like, okay, all right. Motorola also used to have a big problem with this. Many people saying they had phones that never received any even security updates as well. Because I suppose each company has to put the infrastructure themselves. They can't just take upstream and put it down. They've got their own devices with their own chipsets. Whether it's MediaTek or Qualcomm or whatever. Now, because it's an open source project, that means the open source community can do things. It doesn't just have to be just vendors. The one that is most commonly known is what is now called Lineage OS. It started off as CyanogenMod. So CyanogenMod was first made in 2009, entirely open source, and does have some differences with Android. For example, it has FLAC codec support, CPU overclocking abilities, and various other features and tweaks. Supposedly has less bloatware and may run faster on a device than standard Android. It still uses APK as its packaging system, and you can put on Google services if you want to. Now, this was I won't say the granddaddy. There were many. I remember in the really early days of Android, 2009, 2010, 2011, there was a real massive ROMing community, which basically was distros, basically.
Oh,
You know,
the XDA heydays, and XDA is
Yes.
still the place to go, but it is
Yeah.
nothing like it used to be in the
Oh yeah.
2008 through 2012
Yep.
time frame. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
before
yeah.
CyanogenMod, there was still individuals that were doing this work. So,
Yeah. But it was the first one I think that was really caught the imagination, if you know what I mean.
it's
And
the one that everybody started using as a base to make their
yeah,
own.
so it became kind of, if I want to put it as, if you use a Linux analogy, it became the Ubuntu, where most other ROMs were based on CyanogenMod. Okay, I know it's not 100% accurate, but it kind of gives you a flavor of the situation. And yeah, I mean, I remember those days, 2010, 2011, because the big companies hadn't really figured out how to optimize this open source software for their hardware, and people could do better, and people did do better, and CyanogenMod became its own thing, and had a very short and unfortunate corporate career,
Yeah,
where, which was, it was the definition of
forgot about
hubris,
that.
wasn't
Oh my
it?
gosh.
Oh my lord,
Yeah.
it was frankly embarrassing. So I mean, I remember this. This is 2012, 2013 time. So CyanogenMod was, becoming its own thing. It became a company. They started having Cyanogen Inc., which then controlled the, thing, and it got a huge injection of money from Microsoft, and they started actually coming out on phones pre-installed. The OnePlus One, the first OnePlus device, being, do you remember the hype for the OnePlus One?
Yeah.
Flipping hell. You can see why I have a love-hate relationship with that brand. And they came out, and I remember the CEO, whoever the CEO was, saying that, we're going to destroy Google. And then about 3 months later, literally about 3 months later, the whole thing collapsed.
Yep.
And
And
that's
Lineage
how
was born as a fork.
yeah, so Lineage then was born as a fork on one end, and the other fork of it was Oxygen OS, which was maintained by OnePlus, and for a long time was, I mean, it still is pretty good, but it was also one of the, good Android distributions.
Well,
So yeah,
I want to put a stop right here to the this portion of the history, and we will come back to it in just a minute. I want to discuss why people were putting on custom ROMs, and some of it
Yes,
was the lack of updates, and that was a major problem in
Yeah.
that time frame, like you were saying, because some got none whatsoever, and then another problem was, your phones weren't as good as they are now, obviously. And they would come with just massive amounts of bloatware. And if you wanted to be able to properly customize your device, you needed to be able to rip everything off of it and put new stuff on it. And then also, if you wanted to de-Googlefy your life, this was the
Mm.
only way to do it. The
Yeah,
only
yeah,
way to
yeah.
detach.
Yeah, because for Lineage, even now, if you want to install Lineage, you have to install Google services separately.
And during that time frame, the 2009 through 2000, I think 12, 13 time frame, Android basically like put major restrictions on itself when it came
Mm.
to things like accessing memory, which is one of the big things that you said you love about Android. They made it so that you couldn't access like the SD card except in very specific circumstances. So what was the point in getting a micro SD card on your
Yeah.
phone if you couldn't access it? So that was one of the major reasons that brought me into the custom ROM scene. So okay.
Yeah, and yeah, and I mean, I agree with you 100%. It was a way that I used to get updates. I remember, because I remember it was Android 2.2 Froyo, which allowed you finally to install apps to your micro SD card. Because before that, you can only install them to your onboard storage, and this is a time when onboard storage was 8 gig.
Yeah, and
16 if you were really,
I do
uh,
remember the custom ROMs having that little tick that you could do to say move all of your
yeah, yeah,
applications. Yeah,
yeah. It was fun times. It was fun times, I must say. Um, I suppose for me it was the same time I was getting into Linux, so the whole thing kind of all went together really for me. Um, so Lineage OS was a successor, as I said, after the cluster fruit cake that was Cyanogen Inc. Please insert your own swear word. Um, and it was rebranded as Lineage OS. Now it was officially launched on Christmas Eve 2016 with the source code available. And in March 2017, it reportedly had 1 million users, with the OnePlus One, the one that I originally launched with a Cyanogen mod, being its most popular device. So a lot of the other Android distributions that we're going to discuss now are often uh, forks of Lineage. Actually, maybe calling Lineage Ubuntu is probably not 100% correct. Calling it Debian might be a bit more correct, actually, because it is, so many come from that. So one is EOS, or slash E slash OS. It was created by Gail Duval, the creator of Mandrake Linux, and it uses MicroG. Now, MicroG is an interesting project. Basically, it's reversed engineered Google Play services, and it hijacks Google API calls. So you can use Google Play services, but in a private manner. Now, it's not entirely open source. Some bits are proprietary. For example, it's got a proprietary Maps app and stuff like that. The privacy app, ironically, was proprietary as well. You can buy devices with it pre-installed. I remember seeing a review of one on Nick, my Linux experiment, and it was really, yeah, it wasn't the best device in the world, I must say. They were using quite, for the time, relatively old hardware. The Free Software Foundation has declined to endorse E because it contains non-free libraries. Next Android distribution to talk about is Graphene OS. Security and privacy are your main reasons for an Android, maybe your reasons for an Android alternative, and Graphene fits the bill. Security hardened, top-notch privacy protection. Um, the main developer has worked to make Graphene OS a completely secure mobile operating system. Even Edward Snowden endorsed Graphene OS and said that if he was configuring a smartphone today, he'd use its base, as its base operating system. Interestingly, it only supports Pixel devices, including the latest Pixel 7 as well, which I find slightly ironic. Again, I've seen reviews of this. It is really good from a kind of from a privacy standpoint. Performance takes a hit though, um, and now I'm not sure if that's because of the security apparatus that's built into the code, or the fact that the optimizations are often proprietary optimizations. I'm not sure entirely why, but it is something that if privacy and security are your thing, that's the thing to go for. Now, it doesn't even ship with Play services or micro G at all, so it's really a completely de-googled Android fork. Um, Again, kind of like de-googled Chromium. Calyx OS is an OS, an Android distribution that I've actually tried. It preserves the Android security model using Android's verified boot, a system of cryptographic signing of the operating system, running a lock bootloader, and an installer. It was publicly launched during 2018-2019. It was inspired by Tails and Cubes OS, and its goals were supposed to be making it completely open source, removing Google tracking, including apps for Tor, Signal, and Calyx VPN. It also basically only works on pixels. Uh, I mean, they have started testing on Fairphone and OnePlus 8T, 9, and 9 Pro, but they then got pulled because of bootloader relock issues. I had a Pixel 4, which I put Calyx OS onto. It also has micro G, and so you could use the Aurora store for downloading apps and things like that. Worked pretty well actually. Um, Privacy was fine. It ticked a lot of the boxes. And it is the kind of thing that you could use full time. In fact, my for a short period of time, my daughter did use it. Um, when she wanted to ever use a phone for anything, we used to have it in the house, and so on Wi-Fi, and she used it as a normal phone. So you know you could even WhatsApp on it and stuff. It was I think of all of these kind of, and I admit that I am biased because this is the only one that I really tested properly compared to the others. But if you're going to go for one of these kind of security and privacy focused ones, Calyx OS is probably the one to go for. It's the website and the install process is very well laid out, shows you how to do everything. You can get a Pixel 4 for about $100 nowadays. So and funnily, if I even got a Google camera working on it. So I even got the Pixel camera. So okay, moving on to things which I would say aren't necessarily uh, Android distributions. I would say they're more different operating systems, but again, Linux based. So KaiOS. Um, it's basically a Linux based OS forked from the discontinued Firefox OS. Anybody remember that? And it can run with apparently only 256 meg of RAM. And I have seen this on feature phones, and it's kind of like a stepping stone between the old feature phones that we used to have on, the old Nokias and Samsungs of the late 2000s, uh, compared to full-on smartphone operating systems. So you can still get WhatsApp and YouTube and Facebook and all that sort of stuff. And you can get it for it's really made for the developing markets, developing world. You can get it down, get devices with it pre-installed on for as low as $10. There was one in India called the Geo phone. It was Geo is a network over there, and yeah, you could get ones which for 20-25 bucks. But actually, the last time I went to India, everybody's just got Android. Android just basically rules in India at the end of the world. Selfish OS has been around since 2013. It's currently in its fourth generation and is still being actively developed by the Finnish company Yola, and it's very Linuxy. If you want to put it that way, if you think that Android is not Linux and Selfish is Linux, really, um, it's not built on Android, but it can run Android apps using a dedicated app support solution. You can buy devices with it pre-installed. Interestingly, it seems to work best on Sony devices. So, the Xperia XA, Xperia X, um, they used to run it. Uh, User data is fully encrypted by its sandboxing solution called FireGel. All the connectivity and traffic runs behind a firewall with support for VPN. It has a distinctive visual style and a gesture-based UI. Before gesture-based UIs became the norm. So there's that. And then I suppose we should, before we get onto the odds and sods, actually, let me just quickly mention Fire OS. This is a full-on fork of Android. It's a proprietary Android derivative. It still uses APK, still uses the Linux kernel. But if you were using it, you probably wouldn't have any idea it's Android. It's basically made by Amazon, and it's not on Amazon devices. So the Kindle Fire tablets, etc. And it is a complete and utter complete fork. It looks very different. The whole point of Fire OS is to make it easier for you to spend money on Amazon. I mean, you buy a Fire tablet and they even have ads on the lock screen. But this fact that it is basically Android has meant that you get, for a while, Fire Sticks, so the Amazon Fire Stick, became the most common Kodi device because you could download Kodi because Kodi is available for Android, and then people would put skins and whatever. And even now, you can say install Plex on it and run a Plex server. So that's Fire OS, and then the odds and sods. There's AOKP, the Android Open Kang project, which is another Android fork, which started in 2011. It supports APKs entirely open source, highly customizable. There's Beidou Yi, which is the Chinese fork of Android, made by the company Beidou, and it's replaced its Google applications with its own. I still find it amazing that Google is banned in China, and you've got an entire ecosystem built on Android that has nothing to do with Google. And I'm not trying to say that that makes it better or worse. I just find that concept fascinating. Yeah, it's just
That you can do that. Yeah, I find that amazing.
yeah. There is Liwa OS, which is an Android derivative which is optimized for the Chinese language. So, and again uses APK and contains some proprietary code. MIUI is, so it's written here. It's an iOS like Android derivative. I'd push back on this. MIUI was one of these. It was one of these ROMs that came out, in those 2012, 2011 time, and it did mimic a lot of iOS features. Lack of an app drawer. All your apps on the same screen. Even had the same aesthetic. And it then kind of became its own Android distribution. Um, I have used it extensively, not on purpose in the sense of I never used it when it was a ROM that you could download. But when Xiaomi became a company and started selling its own hardware with MIUI on it, I bought a couple of Xiaomi devices. In fact, I think my wife and my mum both have them, I think. No, my wife and my sister. And it's a lot more like the Android we're used to now, with its gestures and its app drawer. And often these devices will have two ROMs, a Chinese and a global one. So one with Google services, one without Google services. And in fact, only yesterday I recommended a Xiaomi device to my cousin. He's still rocking a OnePlus 6T since 2018, and he was looking to buy a new phone. And I said to him that the and also I am not sponsored by Xiaomi. However, if Xiaomi want to pay me ridiculous amounts of money to advertise their products, I have no ethical or moral objections to that. Um, anyway, they launched their Xiaomi 13T Pro this week, which is a high-end phone, 12 gig of RAM, 512 gigs of storage, triple cameras with Leica tuning, Dimensity 9200 chipset, waterproofing, 120-watt charging, which sounds insane, uh, for about $700. And if you buy it from their website as part of the introductory offer, they'll give you a Xiaomi Pad, so an Android tablet, which is worth $350 for free as well. So I said to him, maybe this is what you're looking for. And he was like, 512 gig of storage, I'll take that. Some of the other ones that I mentioned in the show notes, I think are pretty much discontinued now. So Meizu was a company that made smartphones, and they used to have their own distribution called Flyme OS. I haven't seen any of them around for a while. Ophone was an embedded mobile Linux system. OmniROM was an open source Android distribution that uses APK but didn't really use the Google Play Store. Replicant was one of these early ROMs that came around the same time as the original CyanogenMod. Again, its focus was on security. I don't think it's being actively used at the moment, and I've got to be completely honest, I've not heard of Zobot OS. Exobit, oh, however you pronounce it. It's an experimental project to replace Android's Java code with C hash. Ooh, interesting. However, the project is no longer maintained. Its purpose was a proof of concept by Miguel de Icaza. Even though it's no longer used, its existence can still teach us that an OS can still function while being written in a different programming language. It also proves that Android does not need to be written in more than one language. And we hope that future programmers can learn from Miguel's experiment. Thank you, Miguel. And there's a link to its GitHub. And that is
okay.
what we've written about in the innards. What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I like all of this. Now, I thought it was written by Moss. Was it actually written by you, Majid?
No, it was written by Moss.
Okay, just making sure there. Now, in this, we've covered like all of the pluses, and we've covered a lot of the stuff that goes along with these different OSs. But one thing we haven't covered is why not to do this? Why not to put a custom ROM on your phone? And I just wanted to hit the highlights on that and also catch your guys'
Yeah, no, that's
thoughts.
a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
Now, it is not an easy process to put a custom ROM onto most of your phones, because you have to first get root on your phone, which is blocked, and then you have to be able to put a you have to unlock the bootloader, which is also not easy, and it's a different process for each phone. And then you have to put on some type of recovery there so that you can put on your own special images, which is also a different process for each phone. And then once you get all that done and you find the correct OS for your phone, remember that there is there is a possibility to brick your phone by putting a custom ROM on it. I have had this happen on a couple of different occasions when I was running the HTC HD2 way back in the day. But let's say that you even get through all of that and you get the correct operating system on there and you get the recovery working and you load up the new operating system. Well, there's a flag in your BIOS that if your process to put your recovery on is not exactly right for your phone, then this flag gets set and you can no longer use things like Google Pay or Tap to Pay or anything like that. And it also voids your warranty. And a lot of the reasons, unless you're trying to get away from Google, aren't there anymore. You do have the access to the SD card. It is open and you can install basically whatever you want. Or even if you can't uninstall a lot of the bloat applications, you can put those bloat applications into a deep sleep mode where they're not really taking up anything other than a little bit of internal storage. They won't be getting updates. They won't be doing things in the background. So it does take away some of the functionality, putting on a new operating system onto your phone, unless the people that have made the operating system have been very, very careful and have tested and check to make sure that the flag's not tripped. And I can't remember the name of that flag right this second for the life of me. But I do remember the name of the application that you use to install TWRP, which is the recovery program,
Yeah.
and that was called Odin, which ran
Odin. Oh God, I remember Odin.
right, which ran a whole lot better in Windows than it ever did on Linux. I'm sorry to say, but yeah, I mean, it's not like there's no risk in putting another operating system on there, or it's easy. Because if it was easy, we'd probably be doing us distro hoppers would probably be doing it every other week.
The other thing to take into consideration is that in the past, a lot of those things that we don't like, so for example, the voiding of the warranty and, apps not getting trusted or whatever, didn't make a huge difference. But now they do. What I mean by that is mobile banking has become it's become ubiquitous. Everybody's doing all their stuff on their phone. You can even pay in checks now by taking photos of it in the secure app of whatever banking institution you're with. PayPal, all sorts of other things. And if you've got a rooted phone, these apps will, because these apps work in containers, secure, more secure containers, they will see that and they will refuse to work. And so, you won't be able to do your banking and things like that anymore. And you then have to get something like Magisk, which is a piece of software which basically fools these apps that detect a rooted and modified bootloader and phone, and fools them to thinking that it's fine, and so your banking apps can still work. And you think to yourself, wait a minute, this is kind of the wrong way round. I want to do something secure, but it won't let me do it because I've got an unsecure system. So I'm going to use an app now to tell the secure thing that my insecure thing is actually secure. It's kind of like, what was the point? Do you know what I mean? You might as well just go on. You might as well just go off and just blab your details to every Tom, Dick, and Abdullah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's a big thing that affects it. And then also, again, I mean, as much as we use our phones, we love to use our phones in the early 2010s, they were still basically communicator devices, not as much as multimedia devices as they are now. So, things like Netflix and Disney and whatever will have inexplicable errors if you try to use it on a lot of these modded phones. And that's what caused or led to the development of micro G. As I said, this reverse engineered way of getting Google Play services without getting Google Play services and the tracking and telemetry and stuff like that. So there is an argument to be made that nowadays it is not something that you should be doing, except if you do have hardware that you still want to use that is no longer being maintained by the original manufacturer. So we have a OnePlus 6 in our house, which, by the way, I'd like to say was peak OnePlus, but I can talk about that ad nauseum at another day. And it was on Android 11 and hadn't had a security patch for about 3 years. So I decided to put Lineage OS on it. Now, it was a phone that wasn't going to be doing banking. It wasn't going to be doing any of that kind of stuff. And now it's running Android 13. And it's running it reasonably well. And it gets the odd security patch. And it's a more usable device because of it. So they do still have a role in resurrecting hardware. But since support for a lot of that hardware is getting better anyway, maybe that will be less and less of a concern.
Yeah. Well, that's all I wanted
Eric,
to
do you have
add
any
there.
thoughts?
I was a serial ROM hopper uh, for quite a number of years, and that was for good reason to sort of get around limitations and to improve functionality, to lengthen support for the device, and all of those things. And I really stopped. I mean, it just was like something I was so into, and I followed it and tried every new thing. And I guess I had had enough negative experiences that were probably mostly of my own doing, but I just basically got to the point where my phone was supposed to be something that was reliable and dependable, and I was traveling a lot, and I needed it to be solid. So all of the flash of like trying different ROMs with different, UIs and different launchers and all the, the fun, interesting, enticing stuff. Ultimately, if it wasn't one of the bigger ones that was more stable, then it really wasn't worth doing. And at some point, like the features of Android kept improving and improving to a point where there was a lot of parity between, something like a Cyanogen mod and, modern Android. And so I just didn't seem to see the need to do it anymore. And it did also get much more difficult with locked bootloaders and the devices themselves. And so it just got to a point where really wasn't rewarding enough to go through the effort anymore. So, um, and yeah, and then I just sort of stopped doing it. So, we had a question from Mark on YouTube about either of you have any experience with.
So I have seen it used on Huawei devices. So, a bit of backstory. Due to UK, US and China relations and worries about security and Chinese Communist Party and all this kind of stuff and the links that it had with Huawei. Huawei was put onto this entity list, which meant that US manufacturers or anybody affiliated with US manufacturers could not work with it. What this basically meant was that it destroyed Huawei's business almost overnight. I mean, Huawei was on course in 2018, 2019 to really be uh, threaten Samsung's global dominance, which it still has. Um, and then, they weren't allowed to use Google. They weren't allowed to use any Google Play services. They weren't allowed to use 5G. They weren't allowed to use Qualcomm. And it basically destroyed their business overnight. So one of the ways that they got, now obviously they were still big in China because they didn't need Google in China, and so they made their own version of Android called Harmony OS, and it was the the concept behind it was quite interesting. It was designed as a kind of um, not just a phone OS, but a kind of, I think we talk about convergence on Linux OTC. It was kind of thought of as a kind of convergent device. You could have it on your smart home and your smart speaker, and you could have it on your PC. Although I don't think any PCs were ever made with it on it. Um, and it used to have this thing called, it had its own app store called the App Gallery, where you could basically find APKs from all around the internet. And they had this thing called Petal Search. So if you were looking for a particular app, it would. So actually, let me rephrase.
Oh, dudes, the audio cut out. Oh, well, for you guys, it cut out. Mine is still working, but yours cut out. All that awesome stuff you just said, yeah, it's cut out. I, yeah, my cat, when it jumped off of me, it like slammed into one of my cables. So I've
Oh
been
well.
trying to fix it
Anyway,
since. You should be working
That's
now.
so
okay. It'll be in the episode. So
yeah, it'll be in the
Yeah.
episode. So yeah, that it's just an excuse for people to listen to us all over again.
yeah, exactly.
You know,
Okay.
it's kind of like it was a kind of like a cliffhanger of a question. He asked the question, and just as I was saying the answer, the audio cut out, and he probably went, "No."
Sorry about that. Yeah, my cat kicked it, and my camera kicked off, and my audio just went all over the place. And OBS is like one audio source, so it's fixed now for the last 5 minutes of the show.
Oh, okay.
Okay, fine. So anyway, I think that is a sign from upon high that we should be starting to wrap this up.
Indeed.
Vibrations from the ether.
Now
There are no vibrations from
there
the ether.
actually is, but it was for Bill,
Ooh.
so I decided not to put it into this episode, and we'll do it the next time
Gotcha.
Bill is on.
Yeah. Yes, Bill couldn't be with us today. Don't get worried, nothing bad has happened, but I just wanted to say it in that manner. Okay, check this out. Well, GNU has just celebrated its 40th birthday. On September 27th, 1983, Richard Stallman posted a message on the Net Unix-Wizards and Net.usoft newsgroups announcing that he was going to write a complete Unix-compatible software system called GNU, for GNU's not Linux, and we'll give it away to everyone who can use it. Am I right in saying that GNU has never actually been finished? Like GNU on its own, the GNU herd that you can like download. I'm sure I read somewhere that it's never actually had a stable release. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anyway, you can find the original posts and a little bit more about GNU and the GNU project at the links that are in the show notes. Housekeeping and announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something you'd like to hear about, tell us. Send us an email at mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us on Telegram and Discord. Discord's the place for the cool guys. Or you can post directly at mintcast.org. Our next episode will be 2 p.m. US Central Time on Sunday, October 7th at 2023. And there's a link to get that converted to your time zone. Next roundtable live stream, 2 p.m. US Central Time, Saturday, October 7th, 2023. And there's a link to get that converted to your time zone. Next roundtable live stream, 2 p.m. US Central Standard Time, on Saturday, October 21st, 2023. And there's a link to get that converted to your time zone. Live stream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. Time to wrap this up. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, if you like the sound of my voice, I'm on a couple other podcasts, usually with Eric. I'm on the Linux Link Tech Show, which is at tllts.org. I'm on the Linux Lugcast, which is at linuxlugcast.com. You can send me an email directly, jb@mintcast.org, or buy me a coffee with Ko-fi, and link in the show notes.
Moss, who couldn't be with us today, but we're very grateful for his work on the innards. He will be. You can find him on Full Circle Weekly News, Distro Hoppers Digest, and Bard Moss at pm.me. He's on Mastodon at Zyvella at hosttux.social, and his other contact information can be found on itsmoss.com. Bill, who also unfortunately couldn't be with us today, is available on bill@mintcast.org, bill_h on Discord, at wchauser3 at fostodon.org on Mastodon, at wchauser3 on Twitter, wchauser3 on Facebook, and check out his other podcasts, Linux OTC and 3 Fat Truckers. I'm Majid, and you can get a hold of me on drmajid@mintcast.org. Don't bother trying to get me on Twitter because Elon has locked me out of that. So you're best off trying to find me as the Atypical Anesthetist on Instagram, the Atypical Anesthetist podcast on Spotify.
And you can hear me and see me on this and the Linux OTC podcasts, as well as the Linux Saloon and Linux Lugcast streams. If you'd like to get in touch with me, I can be reached by email at eric@mintcast.org or Discord, Telegram, Matrix, and Mastodon. The links are in the show notes.
So, before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. Someone will do our audio editing. Who that is, I'm not entirely sure.
Cough,
It will
cough,
probably be
Majid.
Bill.
Majid.
It's definitely not going to be me.
No.
Mate, I don't know how to do audio editing at all. If you want a dead episode, send it my way.
Good time to learn.
Archive.org for hosting our audio files, Hopstar for our logo, Unedited for the animated Discord logo, Londoner for our time syncs and various other contributions. Londoner is the hidden hand that keeps this whole thing afloat.
Yes, indeed.
Bill Hauser for hosting the server which runs our website maintenance, and the Nextcloud server on which we host our show notes and raw audio. And finally, the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem. And Linux
And
Mint
company.
is my daily driver. Just to say that.
And that's a wrap, folks.
Mm-hmm.
That was all right, actually.
That was a really good show.
That's good.
All right, thanks everybody that was listening on the stream. I'm killing it now.
All three of you.